All right. So welcome everyone. Welcome Anjali. Nice to see you as well. Yeah, there's a number of familiar faces here, and there's some new faces for me. So happy to make your acquaintance if we haven't done so before. My name's Seth Dellinger, and you probably guessed if you are here that I am a teacher of the Feldenkrais method. There's other things I do. If you're curious about those other things that I do, I'll mention those later. But this offering, I've called it Breath, Ground, and Being. And for the most part, it's just an opportunity for us to tune into those, not those three words, but what those three words represent, which is wordless. That's my basic thought here. As I was saying before I started the recording, I'd like to offer just a brief kind of arrival process for us. And then the more extended process involves lying on the floor, and it's probably about an hour, maybe a little less. I'll say more about that in case the Feldenkrais method or the practice of awareness through movement is new to anyone here. But for now, I'd like to invite you to just find a way of being comfortable, however that is for you. It could be on the floor, but it could well be upright, and there might be something nice about being upright. And some of you know me and know this process, but I'm just going to invite you into an awareness of 5 relationships. And the first is your relationship to breath. Just noticing how breath connects your body to the world. Noticing where in yourself you sense the impulse for each new in-breath. How you experience the expansion and the release. So that relationship is always there. And another relationship that's always there is your relationship to ground. So just feeling your connection to ground, the points of contact, feeling of your weight over the ground, how you distribute your weight. And sensing the bones beneath the skin. Thinking of the bones as an extension of the ground, your internal ground. And if you like, one way of highlighting this feeling is to allow your weight to shift, to move forward and back or left and right, or simply being in stillness. And notice that you're in a relationship with space. You're not in a vacuum, you're in a space. In fact, you are the embodiment of space. Your body is part of space. But maybe it means noticing how far away is the wall or the ceiling. The feeling of the space. And wherever you are, there will be sound. Just noticing which sounds are present. Some of the sounds may come from your own body. Some of the sounds may come from the distance. If there are many sounds, you may become aware of a sense of a rhythm or even a music. And finally, noticing whether the eyes are open or whether the eyes are closed, your relationship to light. Perhaps you see colors, shapes, lines, or perhaps you're seeing your imagination. Perhaps the eyes can soften to allow the light to come in. So these 5 relationships are always present. And I call this the presence mantra: breath, ground, space, sound, light. And so later in the call, I'll leave a link if you'd like to bring the presence mantra into your life as an ongoing practice. I call it a anytime, anywhere awareness practice, and just a way to make ourselves present in the body and in our surroundings. And as I promised, it's only if it feels like something that calls you, but if there is something that anyone will want to share just coming into this experience together of breath, ground, and being, could make a little space for that, maybe just for the next 5 minutes or so. Then I'll be offering an awareness through movement process, which involves lying on the floor. I know that a number of people here are familiar with awareness through movement, but I will say a little bit of introduction in case anyone's new before we get to that. But sometimes it's helpful for people to share a little of what they're bringing into the space. So just feel free if that's you. Go ahead.
Hey, I'll just share really quickly. Lovely to see so many people here and really appreciating the invitation and the offering, Seth, to be in presence and to be able to sit together and practice that together because my mind wants to wants to race into the future and try to maybe protect a little, try to imagine some worst case scenarios. So really
Mm,
helpful to just be in a group practicing presence. So thank you.
yeah, beautiful. Okay, so I'll just briefly respond to that, and I'm gonna say something about my intention this evening, and when I'm done, I'll leave another space in case anyone else wants to share. But thank you, Margarita, and I'll just grab that one phrase because I think I've encountered other people who have something like worst case scenarios in mind. That's not really well, what I'd like to say is there's room for that here. And there's room for coming into this. I imagine that a lot of what brings people here tonight is some kind of just opportunity to process and to take care of ourselves, right? And what you also said was something about the future and mind racing, right? So, in terms of process, what we're going to try to do is slow down time. Now, if you're on the East Coast like me, there's a chance that you'll fall asleep because it's going to be a pretty quiet process lying on the ground. If that should happen, that's fine. Don't worry about it. Sometimes we just need the sleep. But beyond that, here's what I'd like to offer as a possibility. Um, so, a very quick story from a teacher of mine. She talked about being with a group of people who were sort of sitting and talking about the world, right? Like what's going on in the world and the future and these kinds of things. And they were in this long conversation, and it was kind of serious and all of all of that. And they were really trying to figure stuff out, but it was difficult. And she just happens to be the kind of person who has been living on a farm and rescuing animals for like decades. And it just so happened that there was a baby deer that she was taking care of. And it just so happened that while her and this group were sitting around, the baby deer just came into the room. And it just did what baby deers do, right? Like, and she just said the entire energy changed, right? Everything shifted. And she calls this phenomenon bodies in space. So if you think about you're in, I don't know, your kitchen or you're somewhere and you're by yourself, someone walks into the room. Nothing else happens. The energy is already shifted, right? And so it's easy to miss, or we know that's true, but we don't really think about it. But if you pay attention to that phenomenon, um, then what can open up is the sense of if times are difficult, if crazy stuff is going on, right? If I know how to find the ground, if I know how to take care of myself, not only is that, obviously of benefit to me, but it means that there's a possibility that we can learn to curve space in such a way that it makes it easier for others around us to find the ground. And so if you're here tonight mainly just to find the ground, that's beautiful. But my encouragement with this process and this kind of practice is that, and what I like to say often is that I don't think there's any such thing as individual well-being. There's collective well-being. So that's kind of the spirit of this offering is that we can come here and find ground, but also if we find a little more ground, we can maybe show up as a body in the spaces we're in such that it's helpful to others who are looking to find the ground. So let me just see, does anyone else want to quickly share anything before we go into the awareness through movement process?
So I'm gonna run to the bathroom real quick. I'll be right back.
Okay, no worries. Okay, well, just very briefly, in a moment, I'll invite you to lie on the floor on your back. The process is, as I said, pretty slow and gentle. There will be what some people would describe as instructions coming from me, but I encourage you to think them as suggestions, even if it's do this and now do that. It's like, do this if it feels good. Do that if it feels good, right? And the heart of this process is about listening to your own experience. So the guidance that I'll be offering, it's like pointing you down a corridor, but the reason you're walking down the corridor is to find out what's there for you, not so much to follow my instructions, right? So just know that if you get partway through the process and that's enough, you can end early, or if there's a particular thing that's invited that doesn't feel right for you, you don't have to do that, right? And because this is really a process of slowing down time and listening deeply, if there is a lot that you're bringing into the space and you feel like, there's a lot going on internally, this could move some of that through, but sometimes there's only so much we want to move through at a time, right? And we decide that's enough. So just please take care of yourself above and beyond kind of listening to what I'm saying. And to the degree what I'm saying is supportive to you, then you're invited into it. Okay, so the process will be maybe a little under an hour. I'd like to leave a little time within the 90 minutes I suggested to see if people want to share at the end. But also, as I said, I'd be willing to stay a little longer if people want to do that. But for now, please feel free to lie on the floor. It's nice that I can see some of you, and I don't need to see everyone, but if you keep your camera on, I'd love it if you pointed it so that I can see you, because part of what I'll be doing is based on what I see you doing. And when you arrive on the floor, you might prefer to bend your knees and stand your feet, or have your legs long. Either is fine. It's also fine as we move through the process to sometimes change the position of your legs. For the most part, either works fine. So just to begin, how much of the support of the ground are you able to accept right now? And notice how does your left leg rest? How does your right leg rest? Just notice how each of your two legs rests on the floor. Perhaps there's something slightly different between the two legs. Feeling the weight of the pelvis against the floor. Perhaps the weight is a little to one side. Just noticing however it is. Maybe as you lie there, you can experience sort of gradual process of the muscles in your back that were holding you up when you were upright, letting go. Maybe some places let go more easily than others. Notice your left shoulder blade against the floor and your left arm. Your right shoulder and your right arm. And notice where on the back of your head does your skull connect to the ground. And then a few times, I'll invite you to exhale. And at the end of the exhale, wait. Not a long time, but wait a little while until perhaps a little pressure builds, and then allow the in-breath to just come rushing in of its own accord. And again, exhale and wait. Allow the breath to flow in. As you do so, just see, is it possible? Maybe it's not incredibly precise, but if you imagine the internal expansion that comes with the in-breath, does it feel like there's a particular place, maybe in the belly, maybe in the chest, that is the center of that expansion? might not be exactly on the midline of the body. Just notice if I don't try to direct the breath in any way, where does it organically seem to expand from? So in this process, that the name that the way I learned it, this is a process is called global breathing. And a lot of the process involves a particular attention to the area of your low back. And in particular, the very lowest ribs, which are called the floating ribs. And so if you don't know the floating ribs, it's in the area of your waist. And they're called the floating ribs because the very lowest ribs, they don't wrap around all the way to the front like your other ribs. They're just floating there. And so if you have a sense of the floating ribs, if that's meaningful for you, ask you to bring your attention to that place. Otherwise, you can just think of the low back. And if your feet are standing or if your legs are long, this will influence the shape of your low back. But again, either is fine. But notice now each time you breathe in, what happens to the space in the low back? The relationship between your low back and the floor. And if you like, you can still make use of that idea of exhaling and wait and let the breath in, or you can just follow the breath in a natural rhythm. But ask yourself, does it feel, when I breathe in, does it feel like the floating ribs? Does it feel like that area of the low back lifts from the floor, or does it seem to move back towards the floor? And the process, it involves a lot of questions like this. I'll ask you, do you notice this, or is it like this or like that? And just know that if the answer you arrive at is, I'm not sure, that's a perfectly good answer. But now the invitation is to breathe in and make a very small movement that involves lifting the floating ribs away from the floor as you breathe in, and then letting go of that effort on the exhale. And lifting doesn't have to be much at all. It just means you make a little more space between that area of the waist and the floor as you breathe in, and you let go as you breathe out. And it's perfectly fine as we go through the process and we have this kind of an invitation to also just let the breath come and go without doing the movement, but then you keep coming back to it, hopefully with a sense of curiosity. We're not repeating movements because there's something great about repeating movements, but we're creating patterns, sometimes unfamiliar patterns, in order to give us the opportunity to listen to ourselves perhaps in a new way. So as you breathe in and you lift the floating ribs just a little away from the floor, see if you can tell that the floating ribs seem to lift more easily on the right side or on the left side. And again, it's fine if you would say, I don't know. But if you're not sure, make a guess. Because the invitation now is to breathe in and now just lift the floating ribs on that one side where the movement seemed simpler. So you create a little asymmetry there with each in-breath. And you always let go on the exhale. And the movement is small, but to say lift the floating ribs from the floor is a shorthand for saying create a pattern of movement that involves lifting the floating ribs. So you might notice that little movement creates a change in the pressure along the back of your pelvis. It changes the shape of your abdomen. You may feel even a slight change in the muscle tone in your legs. You might not feel those things, but it's just saying that you might begin to invite the attention to spread even as the initiation of the movement is lifting the floating ribs on that one side. And now just let the movement go for a breath or two. And you might notice in relation to lying on the floor that the asymmetry in the movement you just did might be reflected in some new relationship to the ground. But now breathe in and lift the floating ribs on the other side. And what's important is to recognize this was not the side that lifted as easily in the beginning. So you don't need to make the movement the same size. How can you breathe in and lift the floating ribs on the other side, but just do the amount of movement that's comfortable? This is a moment where you don't want to think that the important thing is to follow the instructions. If following the instructions doesn't feel like you're caring for yourself. So you use the instructions to listen to what is available for me right now. Just to dip your toe in the water of this particular pattern. And now with each new in-breath, lift the floating ribs once on the left side, and then with the next breath on the right side. Just alternate between the two sides. And again, if the movement is simpler on one side, if it's easier to lift more on one side, perhaps you could reduce the size of the easier movement rather than trying to force the same movement where it's not as simple. And then again, just breathe in and lift the floating ribs on both sides and let go on the exhale. To see, is there something new in that movement after having done the movements on the one side and the other? And then again, just let go of all of it. Just resting, just breathing. Because the process is, again, quiet, the movements are fairly small. If it ever feels like you'd like to rest by lying on your side, just to change, you can do that. Slowing down time is a way to make space for new possibilities, but sometimes slowing down this way also brings its challenges. So you need to come in and out of the process a little bit as well. That's fine. But to continue now, if you're ready and you're on your back again, you can stand the feet, you can lengthen the legs. Breathe in and lift the floating ribs as you breathe in. But when you do that, notice, what are you doing with your breastbone? If you like, you can rest your fingertips on your breastbone, but if you breathe in and you lift the area of the low back a little from the floor, what does the breastbone do? Does it feel like the breastbone moves up in the direction of your head? Does it feel like it moves down towards your feet? And now, if you were to breathe in and deliberately move your breastbone, how would you do that in such a way that the floating ribs would come away from the floor? So in other words, how would you produce the same movement that you've been doing, but rather than thinking that it's something that you do with your floating ribs, floating ribs become a sort of a passenger. The driver is the breastbone. And if you're not sure, you could experiment. Again, if you want, you could use your hands as an assistant. But would you think of breathing in and sliding the breastbone up? Or would you think of the breastbone moving down, away from the head? And once you sense what it is for you, as you continue, alternate creating this movement once from the low back, and then with the next in-breath, you make the movement by initiating from the front of your chest. So in a sense, it's the same movement, but it's two different ways of initiating the movement. And you might notice that one of those ideas feels more natural. The other one, perhaps there's a little extra effort in there. Maybe both of these patterns are something that you've never really spent time with. So just in the repetition, see if there's ways to notice. Maybe it's some tension in the jaw that you don't need, or your tongue. Perhaps there's a way to soften the eyes a little bit more. See if the sensitivity of listening in this way begins to highlight effort anywhere in the system that isn't needed right now. And then just let go of that. And notice, how are you resting? And you sense the bones. How is the breath moving now when you're not adding anything to it? And as we go on, also just notice for a moment up to this point in the process, how are you in relation to yourself? If you fall out of presence, is that okay? Can you just allow that to happen and come back in? Are there distractions that keep coming up for you? So whatever it is, just notice how you are in the process. And as we go on, just inviting yourself to have whatever process you need to have with this, right? So to continue now, as you breathe in, now think of pressing the low back towards the floor, pressing the floating ribs back into the floor as you breathe in, and then letting go on the exhale. If you wish, again, you can exhale and wait. And as the breath fills you, you press the floating ribs back. And then as you did before, just notice, is that simpler to do on the left? Is it simpler to do on the right? And so for a few breaths, just choose one side. As you breathe in, you press the floating ribs on that one side back. And let go on the exhale. You may notice one hip lifting a little from the floor as you do that. Maybe a slight activation in the muscles of one leg. And then switch over to the other side, pressing the floating ribs back towards the floor. On the left, if you were doing it on the right before, on the right, if you were doing it on the left. And then once on the right, once on the left. Just being curious about any differences that you feel anywhere in yourself as you go from side to side. And without any willpower, just inviting that whichever of those two movements naturally contains more ease, it becomes the teacher, so that you find a little of that same effortlessness on the other side. And then each time you breathe in, pressing the floating ribs back on the left and the right together. Noticing when you do that, what does your breastbone do? So as before, when you were lifting the floating ribs, now the floating ribs are being pressed back towards the floor. But if you were to gently push your breastbone down or up, which of those two movements would actually invite that same shape in the low back? So as you go on, perhaps you begin to kind of fill out an image of the whole of your chest, way it tilts with the breath. And let it go. Again, if the quiet of the process or if the subtlety of the process is something new for you, if you'd like to allow yourself to move a little or shift onto your side or just come out, you can do that. And you can take a break at any point, right? You can just, if I'm suggesting a movement and we're going on and you've had enough, then you take your break when you're ready for the break. So now exhale and wait. And just notice, how is that internal expansion compared to what you noticed at the beginning? Is it a new shape now? Are there new sensations? And as the in-breath comes, lift the floating ribs from the floor. Let go on the exhale. And then on the next in-breath, press the floating ribs back. And as you keep doing that, notice again that this isn't really just a movement of the floating ribs. Notice if the pelvis seems to move a little up or down the floor. Is there a change in the roof of your mouth? In your eyes? the way your head rests on the floor. And let go of that. And then try that same thing again, but this whole time you've been making these movements as you breathe in. So can you now breathe in, and then as you exhale, press the floating ribs back. Let go as the in-breath comes, and the next time that you're breathing out, you lift the floating ribs. So the coordination with the filling and the emptying of the lungs is reversed. And let go of that. And then if your legs are long, just for a moment, please bend your knees and stand your feet, have them about shoulder width apart. And so you'll feel that the low back comes closer to the floor. Not sure if everyone heard that, so I'll just say it again. So bend your knees and stand your feet for a moment. And for the time being, if you like, you don't have to think about the breath. The breath will come and go, but make a movement where you now rock the pelvis a little up the floor, which will flatten the low back. And then you reach the pubic bone down and away from your head, creating an arch in the low back, allowing the belly to expand. And just moving the pelvis up and down like that. It's just the same movement that you've been doing by lifting or pressing the floating ribs back, but now it's clearer. It's more of a skeletal movement. Maybe you're pressing the ground with your feet a little bit. And just notice if you were to do this movement and take the pelvis in one direction as you breathe in and the other direction as you breathe out, what would feel most natural to you? Let the movement pass all the way along the length of your spine. So as the pelvis rolls up the floor, the chin moves away from the chest, the head can tilt back. As you reach the pubic bone down and away, the chin can be pulled down. Think of the whole spine being pulled down. You can rest if you like, or you can even experiment with making the movement a little lighter and even a little faster. Just whatever feels good. Notice that your shoulder blades remain pressed against the floor, but you can think of your spine moving up and down between the shoulders. Imagine those vertebrae between the shoulder blades moving a little up and down in relation to the shoulders. Okay, let that go. And now please breathe in and expand the belly as large as you can. Blow up the belly with the inhalation. Do that a few times, and you'll see that this too invites a movement of the pelvis. We're back to thinking of the breath as the initiator, but notice how the breath moves the skeleton, talks to the joints. What do you feel all along the length of your spine as you do that? And then you can pause for a moment. But when you're ready, the next step is to breathe in and actually draw the belly in and pull it up under the ribs each time you breathe in. And notice how that invites an expansion through the chest. You can let go on the exhale. But then begin to alternate these two patterns. One time you breathe in and you make your belly large and wide and open. And maybe you feel the pubic bone gets pulled a little down away from the head. And then the next in-breath, you're drawing the belly up and in, back and forth. And then try something that might be a little odd, so just give it a try. Again, doesn't matter. There's no doing it right, doing it wrong. Let's see, can you breathe in, fill the lungs, and then when the lungs are full, hold your breath. And with the breath held, expand the belly, and then draw the belly up and in to expand the chest, and go back and forth several times before you let go to draw a new breath. So these movements that we're doing with the breath, they can take place without the breath moving. And just do this a number of times. You take as many natural breaths as you like in between, but at least 3 or 4 times you breathe in, you hold the breath, and you expand the belly, expand the chest. Just feel like that kind of wave motion going up and down through the middle of yourself. Okay, and let go of that. And just think about all of the ribs. Each one connects into the spine in between 2 vertebrae. All those little joints. You're talking to those joints as we go through this process. So now, if you like that process of holding the breath, you can use that, or you can just work with the movement on the inhalation. But try now, you alternate expanding the belly and expanding the chest, but sort of aim that expansion through the left side of your belly, the right side of your chest, and down to the left and up to the right. Down to the left and up to the right. Feel how it ripples over the floor, up into the right armpit, down into the left hip joint. Just see if you can create that diagonal shape. And then before you look for the other diagonal, just pause and notice How does your back relate to the floor? Can you feel the imprint of that diagonal movement? Can you feel that something feels different in the left side of the belly, in the right side of the chest? If you just breathe a few breaths without directing, is there something different about how the ribs respond on one side versus the other? And then, of course, make a movement of expanding up into the left side of your chest and down to the right side of your belly. You can do this as you hold the breath, or you can just move with the inhale. And then just think of expanding the belly, the left and the right, and then drawing the belly up and in, expanding the chest. Just go back to a movement that's more down the middle. See how that feels now. And if it feels natural, you can begin to add a deliberate rocking of the pelvis up and down the floor. If your legs are long, it's easier to do this with the feet standing. But just revisiting that movement again, sensing the whole spine, being able to move up and down. Maybe there's a sense that the soles of the feet, the shoulder blades are pushing and pulling the floor. Okay, and let go of that. If it's comfortable for you, you might wish to just lengthen your legs again. You're also welcome to keep the feet standing if that's better. And just notice what's it like now to exhale and wait, and then let the breath flow in. As you breathe now, just imagine that the whole body expands with the breath, that the lungs aren't limited to the chest, that is as if you could breathe in through every pore in your skin. And another active imagination, if it feels interesting, just imagine that your body expands to fill the room with each breath. Moving out to the left and to the right, down below your feet, up above your head, forward to the ceiling and back into the ground. And again, when the breath comes in, if there was a single point that was the center of that expansion, where is that point? You can imagine as you breathe in that the breath expands from that point out in all directions to fill the room, but then to move out beyond, all the way out into the stars in every direction. And then as you exhale, it's as if the whole universe, you draw it all back into that one single point. And then breathe in, expanding outwards, infinitely outwards. Or if you like to play with these kinds of things, you could even think that you draw everything into the point as you breathe in. And it's the exhale that sends the breath outwards infinitely in all directions. It's all just in the imagination, but maybe something new takes place. And then just let the breath move through. And just see is it easier now to accept the support of the ground? And so now there's no hurry. You may feel like you want to stay resting on the floor, but you can also begin to think about how you might want to transition. And my suggestion is to first stand the feet and perhaps roll to the side, maybe even pause on the side. There's no hurry, but begin to just notice the process of coming up from the floor. And can you stay connected to the breath as you, however you go? Just see there's no need to interrupt the breath as you come up. Some people will notice that they want to take a moment for the transition into being upright again to just see how that goes. But eventually come all the way up into standing. Don't worry about the Zoom screen for now. Just see what it's like to be standing in the vertical. What's it like to be standing, to be breathing? Notice the feeling of the length of your spine. Just see, is there still a way that the breath can connect you to the ground? Maybe if you pay attention, there's something a little different about the soles of your feet when you breathe in and the soles of your feet when you breathe out. And if you shift your weight over onto one leg, it might be interesting to feel what's it like to breathe when I'm here, and you shift over the other leg. Feel the breath there. Turn a little side to side. If you might notice every little shift in position is a different breath. And so some of you are already walking around. If you haven't done that, you might just want to walk and just feel that familiar pattern, but maybe something's different now after this process. I said something at the beginning of the call about how our bodies relate to space. Maybe there's something interesting about that. What it'd be like to be with others right now that you care for. Is there some resource here that you could bring with you? Or it could be that there was something in this process that was challenging. That's fine too. Just whatever it is. And a couple people already had to go, so please don't feel obligated to stay. But for anyone who would like to now, just hang out for a bit. If you have any questions about what we did or just something you experienced during the process you'd like to share, I'd love to hear about it. I will put in the chat just a couple of resources for things that I do, in case you'd like to follow up with me in any way. I would be happy to see you again, but I'll just drop that in. But yeah, if anyone wants to share, please do. You can just unmute.
I feel much better, Seth. Thank you.
Wonderful.
My eyes, I didn't realize how tight my eyes were
Mm,
till actually I didn't notice till I got up. And I was like, oh, softer. Not to mention my breath is softer, of course.
yeah, beautiful. Yeah, the eyes are the center of our attention, and there's ways that we can get tense in the attention. And so yeah, I know you know that.
Painfully so.
You do the same thing, but you know, this is just, well, I'll just say one thing. I just happened to be talking to a colleague yesterday who's like an expert with the eyes and everything. But every time you're in front of your screen, your eyes are in convergence, because when things are close, we're like this, right? So getting outside allows the eyes, they don't actually go like this, they just go parallel. But most of us spend most of the day with our eyes a little like this. So in addition to anything else, I had this opportunity today. Someone invited friends to go outside on a hike, and that is just something really great to do for yourself anytime. Just let your eyes go outside. But let's see if anyone else wants to share anything.
Well, I'll echo that I feel better as well. Certainly feel like I have more access to the resource of my breath, recognize its potency a little bit more and the ground. And I had this lovely little experience where we went into the imagination of like our breath, like reaching out somewhat infinitely. And that also just felt like I felt this like through the breath, this way of connecting. Like I was like, oh, I can just keep reaching my breath out and connecting to all things. And then as you invited us to go really small, there was like this preciousness that happened with that. And I was like, and I'll bring it all and hold it right here next to my heart. Okay. And so there was something really kind of precious and nurturing about that.
Beautiful.
Say something. That same part where we were expanding our energy, or breath, it reminded me of the beginning of the call when you were talking about like curving space, like being able to share the experience that we're having of being feeling grounded and being in tune with our breath. And yeah, it just reminded me of how affected we get by each other, like you were saying, when a body enters space, and how there's kind of a power in that to be the one affected, or to be sharing what you have to offer. It's like you can be in a more absorbing place, or in a more of like a reaching out and spreading out what you have kind of space. Yeah, and so it's just like I was like, oh, I can use my breath to share a feeling of well-being if I have it. And then if the people around me are really stressed out, I'm less likely to be absorbing that stressful feeling that they might be spreading out into the space. It's sort of like, I don't know, it seems like there's like with the mind's attention, it maybe is possible to shift the direction. Yeah. Speaking of eyes, I can't like see the screen. There we go.
Hi.
You're so clear. You're so defined.
Yeah, totally. Our nervous systems are totally woven into each other's nervous systems.
And I think I can
yeah.
I can be very susceptible to other people's negative energy, or stressed out energy, and
Right.
it felt empowering.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's not easy, but this is the superpower, is if we can actually be in a space where the energy is tight, or anxious or something, and we can actually, maybe it means we absorb some of that into ourselves, but it's possible. And this is like, none of us are like this all the time, but like we have that capacity, as you say, to just sometimes, like, if I find my breath, if I find the ground, it's more than self-care. It's like, it's the way that I'm in the space. And sometimes I can't think of anything good to say, but maybe I can offer a certain quality of silence, right? That, yeah. It's always a slightly imaginary thing on Zoom, but it's also interesting how much transmits here. I've had many opportunities to think recently about how I don't teach in person as much as I once did. That shifted during the pandemic, of course. So it's lovely to sometimes do some offerings here in Washington, D.C., where I am. I do a thing in the park that some of you know about called Musicality of Being. But it's also been a while since I've done awareness through movement classes like this. I offer a 16-week program, which includes awareness through movement, meditation, many things, live calls where we're talking together. But I'm also curious if just the simple format of the good old drop-in class, you know, is something that people would like. I mean, this is, I think, a different rhythm this week for everyone because the whole world is adjusting. But it's also Wednesday night. I don't know if this is just a good time. So I came with a curiosity about the spontaneous offering this evening, perhaps being something that I do more of. So I'd love to hear feedback from anyone, not necessarily now, but I think if you're here, you might have my email already, but I'll also put that in. And anyways, but again, I'll stop talking, see if anyone else has something they want to bring in.
Well, I'll chime in again. At the cost of taking a lot of airtime, or the risk. I guess what is landing for me right now is this importance of taking the time, right? Like carving out an hour and a half for self-care, to lay on the ground, for a practice of presence, feeling how my nervous system feels different than it did at the start. And also, you know, how you beautifully brought in, and Mary also spoke to, this way of how we can be ground for others, or how our own nervous systems, our own energy impacts others, and how I feel like, especially right now, that is important. And so, yeah, just feeling gratitude and the felt experience of that. And so,
I just want to say thank you, Seth, so much for this. I saw this in my inbox when I was in the middle of my community acupuncture shift today, and I was very dysregulated during my work today. And I really felt, I mean, if I was honest with my body, I was like, I don't want to be here at all. And I know my folks felt that on some level because it was true. And mammals are smart, but I just had I had a deep breath when I saw your email, and I could feel already then that it was like a wave of regulation. And I am really grateful. I really needed it. And it helps reground me in what's very true and also very possible. So thank you for listening to that and for sharing it with us.
Beautiful. Well, and I'll be grateful on behalf of the people that receive acupuncture from you. Yeah.
One person was like, could clearly tell I was like not wanting to be there. And she's like, thanks for coming in today. It's like, you're welcome.
Yeah. I think that, you know, I mean, the process we just went through had all these like little variations and things that we did, right? But I think that a big piece of it is just the intention, right? So even if we don't fully want to be there, but we are there, people see that and recognize it. So I'm sure that you gave a gift today, even if you didn't fully want to do it.
If I might, I had therapy today. I have standing every week, every Wednesday. See my therapist, and anyway, I was feeling bad and I got on with her, and she looked terrible. She was like having a terrible day. And I asked her, I said, what it was, so how many people have you seen today? Because I thought, I told my wife before I went, I said, oh my God, like, because it was 3 o'clock, my appointment, and I was like, she probably has a thing she's been telling people all day, now, because she see people, it's gonna be that way for a while. And but she canceled her morning, and then so I was just her second person, but yeah, it was actually seemed great for both of us. I mean, it was great for me by the end. Yeah, I didn't really feel like going today, but like it was good. So I guess what I'm saying is that she still helped me out, even though she was like more vulnerable than I've ever seen her, as far as normally a therapist tries not to be super vulnerable, but she was, and it was fine, of course, because life is real.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I call turning towards, right? I mean, sometimes we just space out and we're not present, but a lot of times just being present, it's like I don't want to be present because I want to be present with what is, but what is what is. And then, you know, like had a conversation with Margarita today about teenagers. They're always a good example. It's like, do I really want to be with this teenager right now? But when you decide to be with the teenager that you don't want to be with, and like I was teenager, I get it. So, but any situation feels different. Like why do we do that? Well, that's what we call love, right? I mean, kind of a technical way of talking about it, right? But I think when we care, we will turn towards that which is difficult to turn towards. And I think that's worth noticing, right? Um, because we will turn away, and sometimes we have to turn away because there is too much, like it's actually a good move sometimes to turn away. But then sometimes we find the ground and we turn towards again. And if you want, I can send you a whole article about it. Turning towards. I I have a Substack that's on the I won't send a link, but if you're curious, if you like reading stuff about I also write on Substack, so I have an article called The Practice of Turning Towards. Give a shout out to all of you who are hanging out who don't have your cameras on, and that's fine, but glad you're here with us and listening. Um, anyone's also welcome to share anything in the chat. And yeah, no agenda at this point. We're just hanging out if you want to. Aw. Oh, great. We don't mind listening to coughs if you want to turn your microphone on, but yeah. Good night, Anjali. Rest well. Yeah, looks like maybe people are ready to sign off. It's lovely to be with all of you and to share a little conversation at the end of the process. Yeah, if there's something else here and you feel like being in touch, please send a message. I haven't made any decisions about doing more of these, but I enjoyed it. And if people want to come, maybe we'll do some more of this. Maybe on another Wednesday night, maybe next week. I don't know. Let me know if you want to come. I guess we'll sign off here. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Seth, for your generosity.
Mm,
Appreciate it.
Thanks for being here.
Great lesson.
Thanks, Seth. Bye.